Earlier textbooks generally talk about Hinduism as a religion, and today we don't, and I don't in my textbook. I talk instead about the Hindu tradition. And there's a very good reason for this. If one looks at the Hindu tradition, one finds that there are many different forms of what we used to call Hinduism. There are many different types of Hindu religion, which range from atheism, and you can be a Hindu and be an atheist, because Hindu is very much an ethnic belief, an ethnic reality, let's put it like that. That you're ethnically a Hindu, you have certain family rituals, you have practices, you commemorate your ancestors. All of these things can tie together into an atheistic form of Hinduism. And many of the Hindu philosophers, and philosophy was highly developed in India, many of the philosophers were atheistic. So you have at the one extreme atheism, and then you've got a line or a scale which runs from atheism to monism, to belief in one God. And between that, you get all sorts of beliefs, polytheism being a very large element in Hinduism, where people believe in many gods. And then the philosophers come along again, and many of the Hindu philosophers argued that all of these multiplicity of gods really are the manifestation of one God under many forms. So the Hindu tradition gets very complex. It's the most difficult tradition, I think, to teach, because you can't say this is what Hindus believe. And to complicate it even further, there are arguments by various peoples from India, the Dalits and others, who argue that their traditional Hindu beliefs, or their traditional religious beliefs, were taken over by what they would say is Hindu imperialism. That many people in South India, many people in northern India, East India, had what would be called local or national religious beliefs that were completely different to the Hindu tradition. And that the Hindu tradition became very much a tradition of the priests and of the ruling classes that took over other areas of India and then imposed these beliefs upon them. So there are resistance movements, if you like, today among various peoples in India saying, hey, we're not really Hindu, we're something else, we've got another ancient tradition. To a large extent, British imperialism created Hinduism, because when the British first arrived in India, there was no really unified Hindu belief system. What you had when the British arrived in the 16th century was a Muslim empire covering most of India. But it was Muslim overrule. There were very small numbers of Muslims, and there were Hindu, sometimes even Hindu rulers who were dominated by the Muslims. And the British worked with these people to gradually free India from the Muslims. And this is something people don't usually recognize. The Muslim empire was eventually overthrown, and you got in its place the British Raj. And the British Raj, again, was the work of a commercial company, the British East India Company, which in many ways was very similar to the Hudson's Bay Company. The Hudson's Bay Company never really established an empire. The British East India Company did, because of the different circumstances and the density of population and things like this. But again, the British Raj was very much overrule. You had a very small number of Englishmen and Scots and Welsh and Irish in India who ran the company. And they worked as, to a large extent, advisors to local rulers. And these people started being interested in the beliefs of the Hindus, and they latched on to the most educated, which were the priests. And they wrote about what the Hindus believed. Some of them even sort of converted to some form of Hindu belief. And as a result of this, you got the development of scholarship that talked about Hinduism, as though it was one religion over the whole of India. There are alternate traditions. You get from the south of India a number of Indian scholars who in actual fact argue that in the first instance, there were many different religions in India. And then around the 1st or 2nd century, as a result of Christian missionaries and St. Thomas, you got the establishment of the Thomas Church, which spread over most of India, that there were Christian communities, and that what developed as Hinduism, and to a certain extent Buddhism even, was a reaction to Christian mission, which eventually dominated and drove the Christians out, partly aided by the Muslim invaders. So it's a complicated story, but you can find some of this on the internet where a number of Hindu scholars have written about this. Not Hindu, a number of Indian scholars who, the term Hindu can refer to both Indian and ethnically and religious. A number of people from India who are Indian have argued, and they're from the Thomas Church tradition, they've argued that Christianity really took hold in India and then was driven out by this new religious imperialism which became Hinduism. But that wasn't the basic religion of the Indian people in the first instance. There are other complicated questions about the Hindu tradition, and this is the relationship to Buddhism, because all of our early archaeological evidence shows Buddhist communities throughout India, but virtually nothing that would suggest that there was a Hindu presence. Until the 5th century AD, one doesn't get archaeological remains from Hindu temples. Now, this is very strange. And you do get Buddhist remains, Buddhist stupas, Buddhist temples, Buddhist inscriptions over most of India. You don't get Hindu ones. So the history of Indian religion has still, I think, to be written. And at present, we have now a nationalist Hindu party in power. So how it will be written is going to be another question.